Divinity Original Sin was one of my favourite games when it launched on PC back in 2014. Beyond renting Divinity 2 from the local Choices for a weekend back in 2009, I had never had much experience in Larian Studios' dense universe. But with Original Sin, I was immediately thrown into this new world, intrigued by the lore and the characters, and enraptured by the depth of its mechanics. To me at least, the game seemed to come out of nowhere. It was a new release in the midst of a Steam summer sale. While it could have been easily lost in the swell of discounts, instead all my focus was redirected into trying to have a meaningful conversation with an exploding sheep. Admittedly, I felt out of my depth and lost in all the mechanics and possibilities of the game. Yet these were the exact reasons why Divinity Original Sin managed to sink its claws into me with a grip that showed no sign of loosening. The more I played, the more I fell in love with Divinity. Although as a consumer, as someone who was just experiencing the end result of the developer's hard work, I had no idea the chances that Larian had to take to make this game a reality, and how many times they came close to falling. Larian was founded in 1996 and immediately started work on a title called Ragnarok Unless, an RPG that they managed to sell to Atari during the same time that they were pushing the Jaguar console and making moves into the PC space. Although when Atari moved away from games, adjustments had to be made, and Ragnarok became The Lady, the Mage and the Knight, the game that Larian would try to sell to publishers around the world, the game that they hoped would make a name for themselves. Unfortunately, things didn't exactly go smoothly. German publisher Attic Entertainment signed on with a view to fund and publish the project, which saw Larian expand from a small 3-man team to an office of around 30 people. But while development was well underway, Attic Entertainment visited E3 and got to feast their eyes on a little game called Diablo 2. Now Diablo 2 was 16-bit, The Lady, the Mage and the Knight was 8-bit. That was simply not enough bits to compete, my dudes.
So they told us we need to make it 16-bit, which basically meant redoing everything. So they said, no problem, we're going to send you a bunch of German developers to help you, and we're going to get you a license in the Dark Eye, which was this really popular German RPG universe similar to Dungeons & Dragons, like the German version of Dungeons & Dragons, which meant that we had to redo everything. And so we started doing that, but unfortunately their games didn't sell as well as they wanted, so they ran out of money, so they couldn't pay us anymore. And suddenly we found ourselves not only with our own team, but also now with a German team that we had to pay for. And we need to figure out something, and so we started doing work for hire, and as we did that, we started making Divinity, and this is how the first Divinity came to be.
During all the stress of doing their work-for-hire projects and the mental tax of bankruptcy being a very real thing, the team continued to chip away at their passion project, the very first Divinity game, which was eventually released in August of 2002. It was originally going to be called Divinity: The Sword of Lies, which Swen admits wasn't the best title, but when CDV Software picked them up and had a huge success with Sudden Strike, they decided that all their game titles needed to have alliteration, and thus the name Divine Divinity was born. However, that isn't to say the launch went off without any hitches.
So Divinity launched in difficult circumstances. It wasn't finished when it released, which became a theme throughout the history of the studio, unfortunately. And but it did get quite a bunch of followers. So it got quite a lot of critical acclaim once we started rolling out the patches, and it proved there was a market for this.
In an interview with PC Gamer, Swen admitted that even he didn't know the game had launched, as he found out midway through the press tour. Oh, and also admitting to the tiny fact that the game had launched with a whopping 7,000 bugs. Obviously, most of the reviews focused on some of the bigger flaws, but as those were ironed out, players were drawn to Divine Divinity's ideas and saw the game in a new light. Despite it selling well and gaining acclaim as time went on, Larian was once again struggling for cash. The contract under which they made Divinity limited the amount of royalties the studio would receive, and because of that, the studio was hemorrhaging funds, resulting in the team going from 30 people back down to 3, just 5 months after Divinity had launched. Understandably, with a blow like that, anyone would need time to reflect. Swen took a fortnight in South Africa to reflect on what would come next for Larian. After convincing a bank to float them some more capital and talking a Belgian broadcast network in to take Larian on for more work-for-hire projects, Larian survived, but wasn't out of the fire just yet. This move did, however, give Larian the opportunity to work on Beyond Divinity and expand the team to around 25 people. The growth allowed Larian to keep afloat for some time, until it gathered the capital, resources and talent to make a full Divinity sequel, Divinity 2: Ego Draconis. Now this was a big step for the series, as the studio secured the license to use the Elder Scrolls Oblivion's Gamebryo engine, and this allowed them to release their first console game. But even with a new sense of forward momentum under them, Larian and their games were still facing pitfalls.
As we progressed, we ran into the classical problems. So we started making cuts, started making adaptations to the game, but the fundamentals of it remained solid. And so suddenly there was much more pressure than we expected to release. And we weren't ready. The release happened because there was no more finance. The game was not ready yet. And so that caused an enormous amount of stress because everybody was unhappy about the fact that it was releasing. Whereas it really needed another year in the cooker. And the proof of that is that we then got the rights back. We made the Dragon Knight saga, which was like finishing actually what Ego Draconis was. And the Metacritic went up with 10%. So now imagine if that would have been the thing that we would have released originally. That game would have been a big hit. I'm pretty sure of that.
In order to regain control of the future of their games and how they were managed, Larian pursued independence, which allowed them to decide what went in their games, when they were ready, and when they would be released. After scraping by for so long, surviving closure only by the skin of their teeth, Larian made the risky move into self-publishing. During this time, they were also working on and pursuing investment for 2 games, Dragon Commander and Original Sin. Divinity Original Sin and Dragon Commander started out development alongside each other, but Original Sin ended up being the game that really propelled the studio into its new era, albeit still in an aura of uncertainty and risk.
We don't want somebody walking in here and telling us, well, scrap the multiplayer and not having anything to say about it, right? And so to be able to do all of these things, we needed to go independent, and that's when I went and looked for venture capitalists. And so I managed to convince them because I said, look, my previous game sold that much. And we said, oh, really? So why aren't you rich? I said, well, there was a problem. and so since that was the right decision, because since then the story of Larian has been going upwards. I mean, there's been obstacles, but essentially it's always we overcame them and we became better and better at what we do. In Belgium, if you go bankrupt, that's it for you, because everything's personal also, right? So you're marked for the rest of your life as somebody that failed. So we don't have this failing forward culture over here. The risks that I then had to take were huge, right? So there were moments where I got stuck with my car at the fuel station because I couldn't pay the fuel anymore, right? And we still had to make payroll and it was like literally every month, like how the hell are we going to make payroll this month, right? So and keep on working on it and still iterate over what we were doing. So it wasn't the easiest thing in the world. I mean, but we went far for Original Sin. I mean, we had the Kickstarter, which was fantastic. That helped a lot, but that wasn't enough. And then we did the early access. That was also really good, but that wasn't enough. So in the end, we didn't pay our VAT anymore, and we just to get extra time to work on it, because you could see that was in the positive side. You could see how good this game was becoming, right? It just needed time. It just needed, the developers were working hard on it, but they needed time, right? I mean, and you can't be creative if you can't make mistakes. So there's lots of mistakes being made during development, and you have to come back from them. And then luckily for us, I found one banker who believed in it. He said, look, this is the amount of people that are already playing it in early access, right? We were close to 80 or 90,000 people. And said, that's a lot, that's a pre-order. Consider this a pre-order, right? Pre-orders go times 10 once you release, right? So you have to believe in this. And the bank where we had our loan said, well, we don't believe in this, give us all the money back. And this would have been the end. And so that guy actually gave me the money that I needed to survive. And that gave us the opportunity to release the game on June 30th, which happened then to be in the middle of the summer sale, which was earlier than it ever had been on Steam. But I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait until July, because if I would have released it in July, I couldn't pay anything anymore. I needed money. So on June 30th, we released Original Sin, and then I could catapult it all the way to the top of the summer sale, capitalize on all of the fact that so many people came to the summer sale, and like from one day or the other, the debts were over. And so we could pay later. We could pay back the venture capitalists. We could buy them out. So we became masters of our own fate again.
The Kickstarter for Divinity Original Sin raised just shy of $1 million, after starting with a $400,000 goal. And like Swen said, it saw huge successes when it released and was top of the charts in a time where it could have easily been lost under a sea of Steam sales. But true to form for Larian, Original Sin's launch was far from plain sailing.
That moment in life, I mean, like I spent a long time recovering from that period, because not only that, we had problems with our translations, some of them caused by the fact that we didn't have any cash, and we had made commitments to distributors that it was going to be translated on the day of release. It wasn't, right? We didn't have the German version ready, we didn't have the French version ready, so the distributors were furious with us, right? So we got all the trending language from that side. On the other hand, he had that guy from the VAT, no, I'm not giving you an extension, right? And I said, come on, man, normally you do this. Well, not here, right? That was it, literally. Our accountants told him, normally you always get 3-4 months grace period. So we said, that's what we needed. So that's why we didn't pay the VAT. But this guy had decided, no, I'm going to come and collect and put you on the blacklist. The blacklist would have meant the end of any loan. So we had that going on, right? So there were so much things that needed to be paid. The cost of goods needed to be paid, or the factory didn't want to deliver it to the distributors, which was going to be an even bigger. And so, well, we had plenty of debts that accumulated. So it's one big bet. But I was sure, because I'd seen people play it and seen how fanatic they were about it. So I said, this is going to work, right? And so there was also this thing we've had it so many times in the past. We had it with Divinity 1, we had it with Ego Draconis. We don't want to go through it again. The game gets released before it's ready, because it leads to nowhere. I mean, you spent 3 years of your life on making a game, and then what for? Because it's been released prematurely, and then you just lost all the potential that was in there. And that's, yeah, so there. So sometimes you have to be lucky also.
Now, while luck may have well been a factor, Larian and the Divinity series wouldn't be where it's at today if their games didn't deserve to be seen and played by both their ravenous fans and newcomers alike. While I've played games like Divinity 2 Ego Draconis, it was the Original Sin series that made me fall in love with the world that Larian had created. I played it for a second time when the Enhanced Edition came out, and I fully plan on revisiting Rivellon when Divinity Original Sin 2 Definitive Edition releases. And after spending some time with Swen and his team at the Larian Studio, I got to see both the passion and patience that has gone into crafting these games. They're a studio that aren't afraid to admit their mistakes or revisit what they've done previously, nor a studio that will sit on their laurels or let projects lie when they aren't 100% happy with them. After hearing the horror stories of how the studio fought off bankruptcy, it's truly inspirational to see where Larian are at now, a powerhouse of the CRPG genre. I asked if, after all they'd been through, everything they'd learned and the chances they took, all the feedback from Kickstarter, if this was finally the game that Larian wanted to make. If Divinity Original Sin 2 is the game that Swen had in mind in the early days of The Lady, the Mage and the Knight. And I'll leave you with what he said.
This has been an experiment. We are doing certain things very well, I think, now with Original Sin 2. And it's a really good game. It's a lot of fun to play, which is where all the acclaim comes from. But there's a lot of things that we can still do better, and it will take time because the studio has to grow also, and we need to grow a lot, I think, still to be able to achieve what I would like to achieve. So yeah, no, there's still a future for what we're doing.